In addition to saving Oliver's life, he should have done something that would make the Millers wonder if miracles were. The following morning actually started off like any other in the Miller home. Grace, still feeling dazed from her disturbed sleep, she wandered into Oliver's nursery to see how he was doing and discovered Charlie curled up. Grace grinned when she saw Charlie next to the cot, his eyes wide and alert as though he had been watching all night. Had swiftly transformed into Oliver's little guardian, never leaving his side. But when Grace bent to retrieve her son, Oliver's smile vanished. Something was wrong. His face reddened, and his small body felt. Panic Rose felt heated to the touch in her chest, and she promptly took his temperature, which was higher than usual. As soon as Grace cried out to Tom, who hurried into the room, her instincts as a mother and a nurse took over. Tom is still wiping sleep from his eyes. "We should take him to the hospital," Grace remarked, her voice shaking. In a matter of minutes, they were driving quickly toward the closest medical room, Charlie detecting the. As they departed, Urgency barked nervously, scratching at the door as though pleading them to accompany them to the hospital. Physicians and nurses surrounded Oliver, taking vital signs and doing tests while Grace gripped. Her mind was racing with worries about what might be wrong if they had missed a sign of Tom's condition. So she gripped his hand tightly. Oliver's condition worsened, and after what seemed like an age, the doctor finally came to them. "Oliver now has a high fever," he clarified. "The good news is that we caught it early, but we need to closely monitor his condition. Even small infections have the potential to worsen rapidly." Grace nodded, her heart racing. Although they were accustomed to the ongoing anxiety that accompanied Oliver's illness, they remained spent the majority of the day hanging over their infant, who was lying in a tiny hospital bed with his tiny chest rising, while descending with every ragged breath. Oliver's fever had gone down by the evening. The Millers wrapped Oliver up and left after the doctors said it was safe for them to go home, fatigued but relieved. Charlie was waiting for them at the door of their peaceful home, his tail waving wildly as they entered Grace, down to offer the puppy a comforting pat, appreciating his constant presence. That evening, Grace and Tom fell onto the couch after putting Oliver to bed. "We're exhausted physically and mentally, and we're doing everything we can, correct?" Tom asked. His voice was nothing more than a whisper, and Grace gave him a glance while her eyes gleamed with unshed tears. "Yes," she responded firmly. Charlie trotted over, climbed onto the couch, and we did our best to give him all the love and attention he deserves. Grace, tucked between them, carelessly rubbed behind his ears, finding solace in his cozy furry presence. They had no idea that Charlie would soon demonstrate his true value. At midnight, the quiet. Charlie had set up shop in Oliver's room, as he usually did, and a faint, high-pitched whine disrupted the hum of the house. Watching the sleeping infant, but suddenly he was interested in something. He got to his feet, his ears alert, and he released another little whine when Oliver's breathing transformed Ed in a modest way. But Charlie fainted when he saw the baby's chest rose. Charlie's whines grew unevenly, and he let out a weak, hoarse sound. He paced about the crib, growing more frantic, and at last he gave a harsh bark. Tom was startled awake on the couch by a sound that reverberated throughout the peaceful house. Charlie barked again this time, and he muttered something about racing that made Grace wake up. Time is becoming louder, and it's coming from Oliver's room. Grace jumped up and shouted. With their hearts racing in terror, the couple hurried down the hallway and entered the nursery to see. Oliver was still in his cot when they were greeted, but his face was pallid and his small body trembled, stopping them cold. Tom called 911. Grace yelled, "Scooping," and his lips had a small bluish color. His breathing was also a little shallow. She tried to encourage Oliver's respiration by gently patting his back as she held him in her arms, her thoughts running through each. Tom took his phone and dialed, his hands quivering as he communicated the little medical training she had ever acquired. Charlie stood next to Grace, barking, while they gave their address to the operator. Fiercely, as though pleading with them to move more quickly, Oliver's respiration had. Grace's prompt actions helped settle the situation, and the EMTs complimented her for her poise, but she shook her head. She looked down at Charlie and replied, "Wasn't me." Without his warning, we might not have woken up in time for the paramedics. Took Oliver to the hospital for more observation. with Grace and Tom following soon behind. Trauma, and they were troubled by the seriousness of what had almost happened. Oliver had been on the verge of a possibly life-threatening circumstance, and the doctors convinced them that their puppy had saved him back at the hospital. According to the Millers, Oliver was stable and probably had a brief episode of apnea. One of them clarified that this is normal in babies with his illness, but if left untreated, it can be harmful. Grace and Tom shared they had always known that Oliver's condition compelled them to look at each other with a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. Alertness, but tonight had demonstrated to them how fleeting life can be and how even the youngest family member potentially have a significant impact. The days after Oliver's hospital scare were characterized by a revitalized feeling of alertness. Grace and Tom were consumed with thoughts of how near they had been to losing their kid and how the puppy's acts had been nothing short of remarkable, demonstrating that he was more than just a family pet. Grace, Oliver's defender in every way, made the decision to study kind behavior for a while, wondering if Charlie's intuition may have been validated when she came across articles about support dogs that are taught to identify seizures, breathing problems, or even decreases in blood sugar. But Charlie was an untrained stray they had discovered in their backyard a few weeks prior. Previously, his behavior had been completely instinctive, motivated by a strong bond with their child, which both of them found consoling. And when the family got into their regular ritual one evening, Grace astounded Mom. Charlie was sitting by Oliver's cot once more when I observed something strange about his behavior, and my ears perked up. Grace knelt next to him, his body stiff, the same attentiveness he had shown the night of the scare. She asked, "What's it, boy?" while softly petting his fur. Charlie gave a. Grace's pulse raced as his gaze remained on Oliver, who was fast sleeping. She shouted out in a tremulous voice, and Tom emerged at the doorway, worried. With an expression on his face, he asked Charlie what was wrong because he was acting strangely once more. Grace. Tom knelt next to them, observing Charlie, and gestured toward the puppy as if he knew something. Kept looking at Oliver. Do you believe the couple exchanged a worrisome look? He hears Tom say, "I don't know," and Grace's voice barely registers a response. Reasonable, but given what transpired the previous time, I'm not taking any chances. Grace and Tom made the decision to stay that evening, sleeping, taking shifts, keeping an eye on Oliver. Charlie, who stayed by the crib, his body Hours went by incident-free in the dimly lit chamber, and the couple started to appear to relax, admitting to themselves that they may be exaggerating. But Oliver woke up in his. Grace leaned over to see how he was doing when the crib gave out a quiet, muffled whimper. As soon as the nurse's senses kicked in, she saw that his breathing was shallow once more and that his small chest was rising and falling unevenly. She felt a wave of panic as she picked him up and gave him a gentle back pat in an attempt to encourage his breathing. "Tom, we must return to the hospital immediately," she added. Tom quickly picked up the diaper bag and their keys, and in a matter of minutes, they were traveling, Charlie yelling wildly. It seemed as though he knew Oliver would require assistance in the hospital once more as they departed, his cries resonating in their ears. Grace and Tom waited while doctors ran a battery of tests to find out what was causing Oliver's recurrent bouts. Charlie alert behavior, their minds racing with worst-case scenarios, had provided them just enough notice to move swiftly, but they couldn't continue to live in continual terror of the next. Fear. A few hours later, the pediatrician came up to them with "Based with the test findings, we've found the problem," he said, confirming that Oliver suffers from central apnea, an uncommon disease. It is common in newborns for the brain to temporarily forget to communicate with the breathing muscles. Grace experienced a mixture of comfort and worry due to neurological issues, at least. They finally had a solution, but the diagnosis served as yet another reminder of the difficulties Oliver would encounter as he matured. "The good news is that it's controllable," the doctor added. "We'll give you a device that tracks his breathing and gives you peace of mind and enables you to take prompt action in the event that something goes wrong." Tom nodded, his palm firmly holding Grace's. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice full of. At home, the Miller installed a breathing monitor in Oliver's nursery, appreciating the additional layer of security it offered. But Charlie refused to leave Oliver's side and remained vigilant as ever in spite of the new gear. The small dog seemed to have decided to be an extra guardian, because his instincts were more acute than any. Charlie seemed to have an almost supernatural ability, and the couple started to observe other amazing things about him. To recognize Oliver's demands, frequently warning Grace and Tom before the monitor even detected a problem. Charlie barked loudly from the nursery in the afternoon as Grace was making lunch, so she hurried inside to find Oliver. He wasn't weeping, but the unusual position of his leg wedged between the slats in his crib made him feel uncomfortable. Might have resulted in harm if Charlie hadn't warned her nice boy, who scooped the puppy into her. "You are our little guardian angel, Arms." Word of Charlie's bravery started to circulate among Grace's family and friends. During a visit, Sister, a veterinarian, was especially interested and recommended that you think about getting him examined. With his innate abilities, he might potentially become a qualified service dog, and is currently halfway there. Grace's mind was sown with the notion that Charlie's innate skills might be refined to provide Oliver even more support when they think about their dog. She found hope and a glimmer of brightness in the frequently debilitating realities of their lives when they became certified service dogs. The Millers found a new rhythm as the days stretched into weeks. Charlie's constant presence was what really gave them peace of mind every day, even though the breathing monitor offered comfort. "I'm here, I've got this," he seemed to say with every bark, every whine, and every tail wag. They had no idea that Charlie's place in their life was only getting started, and that his relationship with Oliver would grow stronger. His actions would soon bring about a moment that would leave them and everyone else who knew him in ways they couldn't yet fathom. The Millers were surrounded by a fresh autumn morning as they heard their story. Grace was drinking coffee at the kitchen counter while she watched Tom play with the household in the gentle golden light. Oliver was sleeping soundly in his crib in the backyard, and for the first time in weeks, the home felt serene in spite of Oliver's conditions difficulties. The family had started to stabilize themselves by depending on the new breathing monitor, along with Charlie's constant watchfulness. Charlie had been playfully following a ball that Tom had thrown on this calm morning when the unexpected happened. Abruptly stopped in the middle of his stride, his nose twitched, his ears perked up, and he released. Tom was startled by a low, guttural growl. "What is it?" Tom asked, approaching. "The puppy," but Charlie sped by him, his tiny body tense with stress. When she heard the commotion, she went outside to inquire about what was happening. "I don't know," Tom said, seeing her expression as Charlie walked at a trot in the direction of his snarl was getting louder in the front yard. This wasn't how he usually behaved. Grace's, as she pursued the puppy, who was now barking fiercely and had his eyes focused on something just beyond the. When they arrived at the front yard, they saw a man standing clumsily on the sidewalk with a small gift in his hand. His uncomfortable manner and foreign face made Grace tense. "Could I help?" she asked in a courteous but strong tone, and the man paused before answering. He said, "Go ahead, I have something for you," and held the package out to her. Tom and your son Grace exchanged a concerned look. "How are you?" Sharp, the man who was inquiring about her son Tom, stammered, his gaze shifting to, now standing guard in front of Grace. Charlie's bark and unwavering expression said, "I don't want any trouble." The man stumbled and grudgingly read the letter inside. Grace took the. Before she was able to ask the man any more questions, her hands were shaking. Tom pivoted on his heel and hurried off, vanishing down the street. Began following, but Grace interrupted him, saying, "Let's see what this is first." Her voice remained firm despite the fear rising in her chest. They opened the package and found a small worn object and a handwritten letter. Old photos in the envelope and the text in shaky handwriting. Started by saying, "Dear Millers, I apologize for coming to you in this manner, but I knew about Oliver because I knew his birth mother. She approached me before she left, and I didn't know how else to proceed. Grace wanted me to make sure you had all you needed to take care of him, because she saw how devastated and desperate you were." She gasped as she read the rest of the letter, which described how the man had been Oliver's birth mother's close friend. He clarified that Carla had endured a great deal of hardship, not only because of the shame associated with having a kid with a disability. In addition to being by herself, the man had attempted to fix her emotionally damaged relationship with an abusive partner to help her, but he honored her wishes and stayed away when she decided to leave Oliver in their care. As of right now, The pictures in the envelope depicted a younger Carla grinning while holding a small infant wrapped in one picture in particular, with Carla cradling Oliver with the blue blanket, caught our attention. Grace and Tom gazed at the picture in awe as Charlie, a small puppy, sat next to her feet. Tom nodded his head as she spoke with Grace, tears welling up in her eyes. Racing, which explains why Charlie was in our backyard. He must have been looking for Oliver when they suddenly realized. Tidal wave Charlie had been a part of Oliver's life, and not just a stray who happened to stumble into theirs. Carla was attached to the story from the start in a way they never could have predicted because of the seriousness of the. Grace's head was flooded with revelation and concerns about why Carla had decided to. Had she known that the dog would finally make his way to them? Would she have left Charlie behind? What would this mean for their future? Tom, being the practical one, concentrated on the actions we must take next. This man strongly stated that he might be able to learn more about Carla and the reasons behind her decisions. But when they attempted to discover him, they discovered they had no means of communication because the letter was unsigned and contained no contact information. It seemed as though the stranger had just come to present this puzzle piece before disappearing that evening when they were tucking. As Oliver went to bed, Grace couldn't get rid of the thought that Charlie had a deeper role in their lives than they. She sat next to the puppy, who was curled up next to the cot, and rubbed his soft fur, which you had not yet found. Charlie licked her palm, and his eyes were full of understanding as she whispered, "You've been watching over him all this time, haven't you?" In the days that followed, Grace and Tom started piecing together the pieces of what she had said, if he understood it exactly. The narrative using the letter's details and pictures as a reference. They discovered that Carla had been a generous. The decision to leave Oliver was made by a loving mother who had endured unspeakable hardships. One of sacrifices made out of love and the desire to provide him with a better life had been with them. But one question persisted in their thoughts: what link did Charlie have, and why had he decided to stay behind? The answers they knew would arrive in time for Carla, and what part he was supposed to play in their future lives. They were now merely appreciative of Charlie's miraculous presence and the way he had bonded them. Recognizing the revelation regarding Charlie's relationship to Oliver's birth and the strands that bound them all together, Grace and Tom struggled with a range of emotions after their mother left them. The pictures and while the letter provided some answers, it also brought up many more. Who was this individual and why? Had it taken him so long to get in touch? And more significantly, what had Carla's? Days passed while the pair attempted to pull together their plans to leave Charlie behind. After looking over the pictures and reading the letter again in an attempt to find clues, Grace found herself gazing at the image of Carla clutching. With Charlie at her feet, Oliver was mentally reciting the letter's words when she asked me to make sure you had everything. You had to take care of him. It seemed as though Carla had anticipated that Charlie and Oliver would have a closer relationship than others. Eventually, Charlie's behavior started to gradually shift. He appeared more vigilant as he spent even more time with Oliver frequently if he felt that his position in the family had gained new meaning. Grace observed how Charlie would nuzzle Oliver's small hand while she was lying by the crib or following him around the house, or pay attention as soon as the infant cried. It was evident that the puppy considered himself more than a pet. He was do you believe he's a guardian, a protector, and maybe even a reminder of Carla's love? Recalls her Grace asked Tom one night when they were watching Charlie and Oliver play softly in the living room. Teddy nodded carefully. Dogs have amazing memories, particularly regarding those who look after them. I wouldn't be shocked if he recalled everything Grace's eyes were full of. She whispered softly, "It's like he's carrying a piece of her with him, a piece of tears." As the days stretched into weeks, the Millers made the decision to act on her love, which she was unable to offer to Oliver herself. They couldn't get rid of the notion that they owed Carla and Oliver additional information about the story they began. By getting in touch with the nearby shelters and rescues in an effort to locate documentation of Charlie's possible escape from Grace even asked if anyone in the hospital recalled Carla from her brief stint there by reaching out to her co-workers. A nurse who had been working in the maternity ward at the time of Oliver's death called Grace in the afternoon. When I was born, the nurse mentioned that she was young, possibly in her early 20s, arrived by herself, and although it was obvious that she was having difficulties, she was incredibly kind and always inquired about her child. Seemed all right. But the idea of Carla sitting by herself in a hospital room, anxious about her child's. Do you recall anything else about her future? Grace questioned the nurse if she had any family members or where she was staying. She paused before mentioning staying at a friend's place, but she gave no specifics and came across as extremely secretive. Grace discussed the chat with Tom that evening since she didn't want anyone to know too much about her circumstances. Not much, but at least we know that she loved Oliver despite her claims to the contrary. Tom nodded, his face solemn, and it makes me wonder if Mom was abandoning him out of neglect or out of love. What her life was like prior to all of this, and what drove her to believe she had no other option in the. While they were looking for answers, their daily routine at home went on as usual. Oliver's giggle filled the house with delight as he grew stronger every day. Grace and Tom were starting to feel more comfortable with the breathing monitor, which had become a comforting presence. Charlie, the one unkempt stray, was also flourishing in their position as parents. Changed into a robust, healthy dog with a wagging tail and a glossy coat that never weakened his attachment to. One evening, while the family sat together in the house, Oliver was stronger than ever, and the two were almost inseparable. Charlie barked once as they were startled by a quick knock at the door in the living room. Tom's ears perked up as he sprinted to the door, and as he opened it, he saw an old woman on the porch holding a little package. Her gentle gaze swept the room before settling on Charlie, who must be the. Miller stated in a kind but melancholy tone, "I'm Carla's aunt, Margaret." The woman who fostered Carla after her parents died claimed that Carla was always so. Margaret spoke with a quivering voice, full of life, yet she was devastated to learn of Oliver's condition. Margaret gave Grace the box, which included further pictures of Carla and Oliver, as if she had somehow let him down. Margaret claimed that she told me that if you had this little notebook with Carla's handwritten notes in it. Grace and Tom watched in startled silence as they flipped, because you were the only people she trusted in case something happened to her. Carla's thoughts, reflections, hopes, worries, and most importantly, love were all recorded in the journal. Grace was drawn to one entry for Oliver, and I'm not sure if I'll ever be strong enough to be the mother that he is entitled to, but I am confident that Grace and Tom will love him unconditionally, and Charlie will promise. As Grace sat beside Oliver's crib that evening, she sensed that he's never alone. She had not felt at peace for months, but Carla's words had provided her with a necessary closure, and she now understood that they were. Charlie snuggled himself at her feet, precisely where they were supposed to be, and he let out a happy son. With a heart full of thankfulness, Grace reached down to rub his fur and whispered, "You're part of this family too, and we're extremely fortunate to have you." There was a sense of closure after Margaret arrived, and Carla's notepad was found. To the Millers, but also brought forth further inquiries and difficulties as Grace and Tom dug more into Carla's narrative, they discovered more about her life and choices. One line in the notebook caught Grace's attention. "There is a shelter in the town that has always shown kindness to. They took us in when we had nowhere else to go, and that's where I met Charlie. Whatever occurs, I hope they'll keep us in mind." Grace chose to go to the shelter suggested the following morning. She contacted ahead and explained her relationship to Carla and Charlie in Carla's notes, and the staff enthusiastically agreed to. When she arrived, a gracious woman named Linda welcomed her. Had spent years working at the Shell shelter. Carla and Charlie spent a few weeks here, Linda remembered as they sat. She was very young and afraid in the shelter's tiny office, but she loved that. Grace's heart hurt as she told him that he was the only thing keeping her going. The idea of Carla turning to Charlie for comfort during such a trying moment. "Do you know where she went or why she left?" Linda shook her head when Grace asked, but she didn't elaborate on her plans. "I do recall her saying that she wanted to find Charlie a family if she was unable to care for him any longer." As Grace was ready to depart, Linda gave her to be safe no matter what. Carla left this little envelope behind, saying, "I kept it hoping one day." A single picture of Carla and Charlie taken at the location was included in the mail in case someone came looking for her. Carla had penned a little letter on the back of the shelter, saying, "Thank you for giving me hope." It's evident that Carla liked Oliver because Grace shared the new findings with Tom when I needed them most at home. "I wish we could have been there," she remarked, but it's also obvious that she felt utterly alone. And Charlie Remembering her earlier, Tom nodded thoughtfully, saying, "Perhaps there's a way we can honor her memory by helping." Grace's eyes glowed at the thought of what might happen to those in comparable circumstances. "We established a foundation in Carla's honor to help families with children who have special needs or single parents." As they started to explore, she grinned, which is the ideal method to keep her spirit alive. During the fund's creation, they ran into an unforeseen obstacle when trying to raise awareness and rally support. They sought assistance from their friends, family, and the local community one evening since they realized they couldn't do alone. They discussed potential ideas for a benefit, and Tom proposed that Charlie be included. "Enjoys a good dog story," he added, grinning. "Let's tell Charlie's story and demonstrate to others how much he has impacted our lives." Grace was thrilled with the concept, and they immediately set about developing a social media campaign that included images and videos of Oliver and Charlie told one another how Charlie had influenced Carla's life and how he had developed into an essential member of their family. The reaction was tremendous in a matter of days. People from all across the world shared their stories and offered words of wisdom after their post went viral. Support, money came in, and the fund soon acquired traction. Grace was particularly drawn to the remark, "I knew Carla. She was mine." She used to talk about wanting to provide her son the best life possible, one that she would be quite proud of, as a neighbor. "What you're doing," the Millers saw minor changes in Charlie's behavior as the fundraiser progressed, more animated and vivacious, as though he could sense the success of their endeavors. Oliver was also flourishing. As he and Charlie played together, his laughter filled the home. Yet even in the midst of the joy, there was still doubt. One night, while Grace cuddled Oliver to sleep, she couldn't get rid of the sensing that Carla's story wasn't finished. She asked Tom later, "What if there's more we don't know? Tonight, what if someone else loved her and was curious about what transpired?" Tom put he put his hand on her shoulder and whispered, "For the time being, let's concentrate on what we can do for Oliver and Charlie." The following day, they were surprised by a journalist who, "I'd love to write a piece on your tale after hearing about their fundraiser." The journalist claimed it might inspire so. Grace and Tom were initially hesitant about exposing their life to public scrutiny, but when they thought about the possible impact, they saw that it was a chance to reach even more people. The article's title comes from a local newspaper article on a puppy's transformation of a family's life was published. People from all walks of life rushed out to share their personal tales of resiliency as it swiftly grabbed national prominence. In hope, Charlie continued to be a dependable source of consolation and happiness throughout it all. Grace experienced a deep sense of calm as she watched Oliver play in the backyard with Charlie in tow. "Thank you. We're very fortunate to have him," she added quietly. "He's more than just a dog. He serves as a reminder of what Carla desired for Oliver." Tom, who nodded while putting an arm around her. As the fundraiser gained momentum, the Millers discovered that even in the darkest moments, there is always brightness. Balancing the emotional burden of Carla's story with their expanding obligations, Grace especially felt conflicted between her wish to preserve Carla's memory and her hesitancy to divulge too much about her life. One evening, while Grace was sitting in the nursery with Oliver dozing off in her arms, Tom joined her with a folder packed with notes from fans and donations. "Some people want to know Carla's tale," he continued softly, "to learn more about her life and hardships, believing it might motivate others." Grace scowled, her eyes focused on, "I want to tell Oliver's tale, but I don't want it to come out as exploitative because she claimed to be very private." Tom gave a contemplative nod, suggesting that we might not need to divulge every detail and that we should instead concentrate on what matters most to the pair is her love for Oliver and her courage in making such a tough choice. Choose to speak with Margaret, Carla's aunt, who had grown to be a helpful figure in. Grace discussed their worries about their lives over tea in the Millers' comfortable kitchen. Margaret acknowledged that Carla was a private person, but she also wanted Oliver to live the greatest life possible. Therefore I believe that she would have wanted Margaret's tale to inspire others and preserve her memory. Grace and Tom skillfully constructed a story that emphasized Carla's bravery and affection without going into the more distressing parts of her history. They showed their manuscript to Margaret, who gave it her heartfelt approval. As word spread, The Millers started getting messages from foster families, single parents, and even Grace and Tom, past adoptees who found hope and support in Carla's journey, were moved by the overwhelming of assistance, but they also felt the burden of the duty they had assumed. One message in particular caught their attention. Was in a similar predicament to Kara. I had to make the painful choice to place my child for adoption. Thank you for sharing Grace's story. It has given me hope that he is leading a happy life. She read the note to Tom out loud. It's amazing to think that Carla's story is helping others, she added, her voice breaking with emotion. But it's also. In the meantime, Charlie's status in the family seemed to be changing, serving as a reminder of how many people are struggling to silently lie by Grace's feet and feel the emotional weight of the moment while she received messages from. He would occasionally prod her while she worked on plans for the fund or with supporters. One afternoon when Grace sat in the living room, he would put a paw on her lap or touch her hand with his snout as though to say, "I'm here for you." Charlie barked and raced to the front door while the room was organizing the specifics of the fundraiser. Grace opened the door to discover a young woman with tears in her eyes stood on the doorstep and said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Emily, and after I discovered your story online, I felt compelled to come." Emily revealed that she had met Carla at the shelter where she had resided with Charlie, and I knew Carla. We became friends. Emily mentioned you all holding your hand tightly in her lap, about how she was terrified, but she insisted that she thought you would be Oliver's ideal family. Grace listened carefully, tears running down her cheeks, wanting the best for him. When she asked Emily if she had ever discussed the reason behind her departure, she nodded, her eyes streaming. She spoke with emotion, feeling inadequate for him, yet her love for him was more than anything she had before said. That Charlie was how she kept in touch with him, and the talk with Emily gave Grace a feeling of closure. However, it also strengthened her determination to see the fund through to completion, and she and Tom started organizing a community event to raise. They chose to call it Carla's Legacy in order to raise awareness and provide support for needy families and single parents. The event was families came together to enjoy food, games, and live music on a bright Saturday afternoon in the neighborhood park. Charlie swiftly rose to prominence. Kids chuckled while playing fetch with him, and adults grinned as the ceremony came to an end, Grace approached the stage to share his tale and express gratitude. With Charlie at her feet and Oliver in her arms, she thanked everyone for their support and spoke candidly about Carla's bravery and the value of community. Carla was a firm believer in the transformative power of love and kindness. She claimed to have given us the best present we could ever hope for, and we wish to repay her by others. Thank you for helping us preserve her legacy. The audience cheered, and Grace felt at ease. Wash over her, she glanced down at Charlie, who seemed to be saying, "We did it," as he waved his tail in bed. Gave the Millers a tremendous sense of achievement, but it also raised awareness of their story attention that resulted in unforeseen issues. News organizations started reaching out to them asking. Grace and Tom were wary of interviews and exclusive features because they wanted a safeguard. One evening, when they went over their privacy policies, they made sure to maintain the fund in the public eye for a worthy cause. Forthcoming obligations. When Tom got a call from an unidentified number, he paused before responding, but he was immediately drawn to the voice on the other end. "My name is Dr. Sylvia Green, and I'm Mr. Miller." The speaker continued, "I've been following your story, and I think I'm a psychologist who worked with Carla at the shelter. Have anything that might be of interest to you today?" "What is it, Doctor?" Green asked if I may have some of Carla's private correspondence, but never sent. Dr. Green clarified that she hoped Oliver would eventually receive them, but she wasn't sure how or when to share them. But I believe that this would be the ideal moment. Grace and Tom met the following morning. The psychologist, Dr. Green, is a gentle woman with a soothing, gave them a little tattered journal in which Carla wrote about her dreams for Oliver and fastened it with a bit of twine. In her difficulties, Grace's hands trembled as she freed her hands and said she wanted him to know how much she loved him. The string and opened the journal, which had a little note to my son Oliver on the first page. I hope these words are helpful. Later that night, the Millers go through the notebook, and you realize how much you've always meant to me. We're moved by Carla's unvarnished honesty and unwavering devotion to her kid in one section stuck out in particular. I hope you learn that you were always a blessing rather than a burden, and I wasn't strong enough to. I found a family who could offer you the life you deserve, D, but they're my greatest gift to you, just as you were mine. Grace brushed away her tears as she read the piece aloud, her greatest gift to the world. She whispered, I wish you could see how happy he is now, since she loved him so much. Additionally, the notebook showed the Millers a side of Carla that was full of hopes and desires. Inspired by Grace's generosity during her hospital stay, she had written about her desire to become a nurse, envisioned creating her own safe haven where no one would feel as alone as she did for mothers and children in need. We must turn her dream into a reality. Tom sighed deeply as he closed the journal. He remarked, let's expand the fund, not only for Oliver, but also for Carla. Grace, who nodded. We may use it to fund programs and shelters that assist children and single parents as they start their lives, she said. Organizing Carla's legacy's next phase, a reporter from a national news outlet faced a new difficulty. Contacted them to express interest in conducting a feature on their tale, and the Millers seized the chance to promote awareness, but they were also cautious about putting their family in the spotlight. Following extensive discussion, they consented to the interview, establishing explicit guidelines to preserve Oliver's privacy. Leah, a kind-hearted writer, spent a day with the Millers to record their journey and the effects of Carla's legacy. Leah inquired about Charlie's contribution to their life during the conversation. He's more than simply a dog, Grace remarked with a smile, adding that he serves as a companion, guardian, and reminder of Carla's love for Leah's article. How a Family Transformed Tragedy into Hope, dubbed From Struggle to Strength, published a week later. It received a lot of attention and helped Carla's legacy raise a lot of money. But one afternoon, when Grace was organizing the donation record she received, the newly discovered support took an unexpected turn. She was shocked to discover a handwritten note in the mail, enclosed in an unlabeled, simple envelope. Carla was courageous to leave Oliver with you, but if you want the full story, you'll need to read this note. Fact, the note was not signed, and Grace met me at the shelter where she stayed. Unable to get rid of the uneasiness it caused her, she showed it to Tom, who acknowledged her worries, but also thought they couldn't disregard it. The next day, they went to the shelter with Linda, a staff worker, who had previously assisted them, was taken aback to see them again, and Linda's face changed as Grace described the note. Sincerely, Carla mentioned that she was concerned about someone from her past, but I'm not sure who sent this, Linda stated. She didn't elaborate when we found her, but it appeared that she was fleeing from the revelation. Gave Carla's narrative an air of intrigue by posing questions like who she was fleeing and why someone had chosen this moment to disclose it. However, Grace and Tom couldn't get rid of the impression that their journey with Carla's legacy was still ongoing after they left the shelter. Was far from over. The anonymous note made Grace and Tom anxious. Why now? And who would send such a message? The sentence felt foreboding, but she couldn't stop repeating it in her head. There's more to her story than you know. Fascinating, as like it were guiding them to reveal a previously unknown aspect of Carla's life. Tom said the following morning, advised using caution, and that we include Linda, who he claimed knew the shelter personnel and could be able to provide additional background on Carla's stay there. Grace consented, and they went back to the shelter that afternoon. Linda already. Carla was very close to this person, and she was aware of their worries and had done some research of her own. According to Linda, they frequently spoke late into the night with a woman named Rachel. Might have a better understanding of Carla's struggles. Linda assisted in setting up a meeting with Rachel, who was now living. When Grace and Tom arrived at the shelter's transitional accommodation, Rachel welcomed them with warmth, but with evidently hesitant. I wasn't sure whether to discuss Carla. Rachel. She kept a lot of information about her background hidden, but I'll share what I know about her if it helps you better understand her. Rachel recalled her memories of Carla in a tiny, brightly lit room. She was one of the, Rachel stated, I've never met stronger people, but she was in a lot of pain. She informed me that she had left a toxic relationship because the man she was with was domineering and manipulative. Grace's heart fell when she questioned, do you think he could be the reason why she didn't want to raise Oliver herself? Rachel nodded. She was constantly watching over her shoulder and it didn't feel comfortable. fearing that he might discover her. This revelation gave Carla's story Grace a new dimension, and Tom realized that she had not only left Oliver due to financial difficulties, but also because she was more courageous than we ever imagined in making sure he was safe. Grace whispered softly as Grace experienced a renewed feeling of purpose when they left Rachel's house. We must do more than only pay tribute to Carla's memory. Inform Tom that we must ensure that no one else must experience what she did, and their discussion sparked a new effort inside Carla's Legacy, a charity dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence. They contacted local groups and started forming alliances to supply resources for women and children in need of the response. Was tremendous, with volunteers offering their assistance and donations pouring in. The moment a former shelter resident, moved by Carla's tale, offered to tell her own was one of the most heartwarming. Her boldness at a neighborhood function brought the crowd to tears and reaffirmed the fund's significance. In the meantime, Charlie and Oliver's relationship became stronger. The young child is now more active and inquisitive and spends hours. One day, while Grace was watching them from the kitchen window while playing with a devoted puppy, she spotted something. Tom came to see that Oliver, who had been reluctant to stand alone, was using Charlie as support, called her emotional voice, and they both watched as Oliver took his. It's a marvel that the initial hesitant steps were balanced by Charlie's fur. Charlie has done more for Oliver than we could have ever imagined, Grace said in a murmur, tears flowing down her face. The Millers were convinced that Cara had made the correct decision in entrusting them with this touching moment. Tom remarked that Oliver must have realized that Charlie would be necessary to complete our family. But as they celebrated Oliver's progress, the mystery surrounding the anonymous note persisted in the background, leaving Grace perplexed as to who sent it and why she couldn't get the. One evening, while the Millers were calming down after a hard day, they had the impression that there was yet more to discover. When the doorbell rang and Grace opened it, she saw a middle-aged man standing on the porch. He had weary eyes and he questioned in a worried manner, "Mrs. Miller, I'm not sure if you'll want to hear this, but I must share with you Carla Grace's story." Despite her hesitation, she allowed him inside, and he identified himself as David. "I've been following the news of Carla's Legacy, and her former landlord stated he remembered her name that I wanted to let you know that I assisted her in leaving." David stated that Carla had approached him in desperate attempt to find a safe location to remain while she considered her options. Was afraid, and although she claimed she didn't want to tell me anything, Grace listened, and I could sense she was fleeing. Carefully as David explained how he had given Carla the tools to begin the process of finding the sanctuary. David claimed that she was so committed to giving Oliver a better life that she even claimed she had seen you in the hospital and thought you were the best person to take care of David's illness. Stories supported Grace and Tom's suspicion that Carla's actions were motivated by love and a strong desire to keep her safe. "Thank you for sharing this with us, son," Grace stated in an emotionally charged voice. Knowing how much she cared is very meaningful. When David went, Grace felt a feeling of, finally, Carla's tale was beginning to come together, and her courage. Despite the clarity that David's account offered, the Millers were unable to get rid of the burden of Carla's background. The disclosure of her battles with domestic violence and her valiant escape filled Grace and Tom. It was a moving reminder of the sacrifices Carla had made to protect him, and he felt both admiration and sadness. The enigmatic message continued to hang over Oliver and the risks she had taken to secure his future. Nevertheless, its foreboding tone implied that story Grace had more to it, and Tom discussed whether to follow up on the lead further, but a part of them wished to put an end to the chapter for good. Parr was unable to disregard the potential that there might still be someone out there who was hostile toward Oliver, or even Carla's recollection. One evening as Grace went over the most recent contributions and updates regarding Carla's legacy, Tom came in with a file. He started reluctantly. "Grace, I believe I discovered something Tom had been looking into, using information from David regarding Carla's past and the possible threat she may have been fleeing." Following Rachel's stories, he looked through documents that eventually brought him to a restraining order Carla had submitted years prior against Oliver's biological father, Brian Dempsey. Caught Grace's breath. She questioned, "Do you believe HEK The person who wrote the letter has a history of manipulation, and we must be ready if he finds out where Oliver is." The Millers made the decision to. Their lawyer Sarah examined the restraining order and sought legal guidance. "The custody papers that Carla had lawfully left for Oliver belong to you, Sarah. Promise them, but it might cause problems for you if this man chooses to contest your custody, even without any justification." Family Grace pleaded. "What can we do to protect Oliver?" As her stomach turned, proactive Sarah suggested notifying the police of the letter and requesting a protective order if Brian. Given that the Millers took these preventative measures, they will need to look into Dempsey's motivations. Grace confided in Linda and Rachel, who provided their steadfast support, as they also relied on their community. Linda remarked that Carla trusted you with Oliver, and you're keeping that trust by encouraging yourself, fighting for him as Charlie's behavior grew more watchful and devoted. Having already demonstrated his protective nature, the puppy appeared to detect the stress in the home and started. He seems to sense something's wrong because he sleeps by Oliver's cot at night and barks at the smallest strange noise. One wet afternoon, Grace saw that the Millers got a call that caused them to become extremely anxious. It came from a private investigator they had engaged to learn more. "Regarding Brian, we found him, and the investigator stated that he is only a few. When he attempted to get in touch with us, Towns over Grace felt a shiver go down her spine. The investigator responded when questioned indirectly, but it's obvious he's been asking inquiries concerning Oliver and your family." The Millers were shocked by the news, and Tom paced the living room, his thoughts racing. Oliver strongly stated that he handed up his rights the moment he left Carla and their son, and that he couldn't let this man to ruin his life. Grace nodded, her determination strengthening. "We must be prepared for whatever comes next." The Millers found courage in one another as they prepared for a possible confrontation in there. They gathered the community at the shelter to rally support for Carla's legacy and spread the word about the issues that survivors of domestic abuse experience. The event was a huge success and attracted many people from many backgrounds who were moved by Carla's tale and the Millers' dedication to her memory over the. Rachel stated, "I think I saw someone watching from the parking lot," as she walked nervously up to Grace. Silently, Grace's heart skipped a beat as she looked over the crowd, but no one seemed suspicious, raising the probability that Brian was close by. Increased her alertness later that evening. When the family got home, Charlie could feel the tension in the air, perked up as they walked inside, his nose twitching as though he could sense something out of the ordinary. "Did you hear Grace whisper?" Tom heard a low creak and a slight, rustling sound coming from the rear. He reached for a flashlight, and Charlie was with him as he cautiously went outdoors because the rain had stopped. As Tom looked around the yard, he saw footprints on the muddy, slick ground. Charlie snarled softly, his body rigid and alert as he headed toward the side gate, his grip tightening on the flashlight. Tom said his voice was steady, yet urgent as Grace called the police. 911, her heart thumping, her hands shaking. She held Oliver close. Tom and Charlie followed the footprint trail to the edge of the area as she waited for the authorities to arrive outside. When the police came, they carried out a comprehensive investigation of the property, where they discovered a piece of ripped fabric stuck to the fence. Search, but there was no indication of an intruder. "Whoever they were, they have now left," the police stated, "but we will step up patrols." The Millers were startled, but more motivated than ever to protect those in the vicinity to keep watch after the occurrence. Grace glanced at Oliver, who was blissfully oblivious to the danger that had infiltrated so near their house. As they got ready for bed that evening, Tom placed him in her arms and said, "Won't let anything happen to you." Charlie curled up by the ripped fabric in a plastic bag with the intention of having it examined for fingerprints. Crib, his vigilant gaze sweeping the room, Grace and Tom sat at. The ripped fence fabric was sitting in a sealed plastic bag on the kitchen table while they reviewed their alternatives. "This can't be a coincidence," Grace stated in a steady voice, countering a clear reminder of the potential threat. "However, if Brian's still out there, we must face him directly." Tom nodded, his face solemn, "but we must be careful not to allow him to control the situation or place." That afternoon, the private investigator called to inform Oliver that he was in danger and that the cloth you discovered matched the. Brian described a jacket he's been spotted wearing and said he's probably been attempting to get close to. Grace felt a chill go down her spine when she saw Oliver threatened you. Do we have sufficient to alert the authorities? The investigator said. Yes. I've already given the police proof of his. Because of his recent actions and previous restraining order, the Millers are getting ready to request a warrant to question him. As a precaution, they set up surveillance cameras across the property in the days that followed, and they worked with the police for routine patrols. Grace also contacted their lawyer, Sarah, who suggested that they obtain additional legal protection by filing a restraining order against Brian. But as the days went by, as the household's tension increased, Charlie remained extremely watchful, barking at every. He knows something's wrong because he's pacing restlessly at night. Tom added. One evening, observing the puppy with his ears perked up at the front window, Grace and Tom exchanged a tired look as the doorbell rang while the family was getting ready for dinner. Were we expecting anyone? As she scooped Oliver into her arms, Grace begged, Stay here, Tom. Tom shook his head, murmured, warily making his way to the door, Charlie closely following his low growl. When Tom opened the door and froze, he saw Brian Dempsey standing on the porch with his fist jammed into. Brian hurriedly raised his hands in a gesture, saying, I'm not here to cause trouble, in the pockets of a worn jacket. Of giving up, all I need to see is my son Tom go outside and shut the door behind him, but leaving it open a little bit. You forfeited that privilege when you left him. Tom sternly said. Why are you here? Brian's gaze shifted to the window, where he saw Grace embracing Oliver. I made a mistake. Grace watching, I've changed, but I just want a chance to explain myself. Felt a wave of rage from within for daring to arrive without warning following. Carla gave Oliver to Linda, who was coming to help with dinner, after everything she had been through, and then she went outdoors. Carla Grace replied in a stern voice. To join Tom, you don't get to waltz back into his life after abandoning him. Brian recoiled at her comments, and I had no idea how terrible things were. Do you have any concept what she endured to keep him safe from you? Before Grace could react, he said, I made mistakes, but I want to make amends after getting something for her. When two police cars approached the curb with their lights flashing and sirens blaring, policemen got out and one of them, Mr. Dempsey, came to the porch and said, We need to talk to you. As the cops brought him to one of the cars, Brian appeared surprised, but did not object. This isn't over, he murmured. The officers reassured the Millers, I'll be back, while keeping their eyes on Grace and Tom. Knowing Brian would be subjected to in-depth interrogation, and that their proof would bolster the case against him, As the cops departed, Grace drew a trembling breath, and one of them remarked, We'll do everything we can to keep your family safe. She remarked, Do you believe that's the last we'll see of him? Tom put a comforting hand on her shoulder and said, We'll be ready if. He didn't say it, but let's concentrate on keeping Oliver safe and going forward for the time being. Later that evening, Oliver played with the Millers while they sat in the living room, thinking back on the day. The sight of Charlie laughing on the ground while the puppy nuzzled his face gave Grace a renewed feeling of purpose. We've come so far, she added gently, and we'll protect him no matter what. Tom nodded, staring at their kid. Carla trusted us with Oliver because she knew we would stand up for him, and we will do just that. As the family got ready for bed, Charlie sat by Oliver's cot and looked around the room with alert eyes, while Grace leaned down too. She stroked his fur and said, Thank you, Charlie. We couldn't do this without. The puppy's devoted presence and tail wagging served as a reassuring reminder that they weren't fighting for their lives alone. After Brian was taken away by the authorities, there was a minor decrease in the tension within the Miller household. But Grace and Tom knew they had won a battle, but they weren't persuaded because of what had happened that night. Even after the conflict ended, they had a nagging suspicion that Brian would try to take back some aspect of Oliver's life. Regardless of how flimsy his allegation was, Grace was getting ready one morning a week later. Her heart skipped a beat as she reflexively looked at the security when the doorbell rang during breakfast. Monitor, she was relieved to see a woman carrying a big envelope instead of Brian. With a gentle smile, Grace opened the door gingerly and asked Mrs. Miller, As a social worker, I was tasked with reviewing Oliver's custody case and Grace's stomach-twisted custody case. The social worker clarified that Brian had specifically asked for a review of the adoption that mentions a wish to be involved in Oliver's life and new circumstances, but it doesn't mean anything will change, she said hastily after noticing Grace's worried look. But we must look into his allegations. Tom went to the living room with Grace and the social worker to talk about the Charlie cuddled up at their feet, his presence providing quiet solace in this scenario. Oliver Tom stated emphatically that he is our son in every aspect and that we have done everything in our power to give him a loving and secure home. According to my first views, the social worker nodded. So that's important, but we'll have to follow the court procedure, which involves assessing Ms. Dempsey's present conditions throughout the ensuing weeks. The Millers diligently gathered proof to bolster their claim that included images, medical information, and testimonials from neighbors and friends who had seen their steadfast. Grace also sent a touching letter outlining her commitment to Oliver's well-being, Charlie's protective nature, Carla's last desires, and the close relationship they had developed with Oliver since his arrival. His instincts became stronger, and he followed Oliver around, constantly remaining near him as though. One evening, while Grace was sitting near Oliver's cot, she sensed the family's increased anxiety. When she got closer, she saw nothing out of the ordinary, only Charlie's low growl when she observed him peering closely at the window. The arrival of the court date on a gloomy morning sent a shiver down her spine. Laden with clouds that reflected the Millers' anxiety, Grace and Tom entered the courthouse holding hands. The court had given the puppy exceptional authorization, while Oliver was curled up in Grace's arms and Charlie was by their side. To acknowledge his contribution to Oliver's life in the courtroom, Brian sat with his attorney, who looked calm and well-groomed, in sharp contrast to the man who had shown up at their door weeks before. Previously, his attorney contended that Brian had undergone substantial life adjustments and deserved the opportunity to participate in his son's development. When Grace's moment came, she stood silently. Despite the anguish, she stated in a firm voice that this isn't simply about who has the legal authority to Oliver. She is thinking about what's best for him, because Brian left him when my husband and I have provided him with stability and affection when he most needed it, the attention he merits. As his parents, we will do everything in our power to keep him safe. As Grace spoke, the judge listened intently, taking notes. Tom then added his viewpoint and highlighting the actions they had taken to provide Oliver with a secure and caring environment. As the case went on, a shocking development occurred. The Millers' lawyer presented data from a private investigator showing that Brian had much less stable personal and financial circumstances than he had stated, and the investigator also found evidence that Brian had communicated with well-known. When the evidence of Brian's illicit conduct was presented, the courtroom fell silent. His calm manner broke, and he and his lawyer exchanged desperate whispers. Grace and Tom looked at each other, with a glimmer of hope between them. The judge called a quick break to go over the new details. During the break, Grace and Tom went outside to collect their thoughts, while Charlie walked at a trot. When the court reassembled, the judge brought her to them, his tail wagging slightly as though he could sense their relief. Considering the strong evidence that was presented, it is evident that Mr. Dempsey does not yet have the consistency or moral fiber necessary to positively impact Oliver's life. The adoption is upheld by the court, and Mr. and Mrs. Miller are given full custody. Additionally, to protect the child's safety and well-being, a permanent restraining order will be granted. Grace's relief was so great that she tightly gripped Oliver while tears streamed down her face. Charlie excitedly barked his tail as Tom put his arms around them both. A reporter came up to them as they were leaving the courthouse, wagging wildly as though they were joining them in celebrating their victory. Grace paused for a response, her voice firm and full of appreciation. "It is more than simply a triumph for our family. It serves as a reminder that love, devotion, and doing the right thing will always win out." The Millers were welcomed home that evening by their neighbors and friends, who had come to rejoice. As Oliver walked around with Charlie at his heels, Linda and Rachel gave Grace a firm hug. The sound of the young boys laughing filled the room, reminding everyone of the tenacity of family and love later. As Grace and Tom sat on the couch, watching Oliver and Charlie sleep soundly, as the house became quiet. "We did it," Grace remarked. Tom nodded his head as she gently placed her palm on his, "keeping our family together, focused on their kid, and we always will." For the Millers, the days after the court's ruling felt like a fresh start. Family, a sense of security and thankfulness, had taken the place of the uncertainty that had before weighed on their home. Grace stood in the midst of tension and anxiety, radiating warmth and hope. One sunny morning in the kitchen, Oliver was playing in the backyard with Charlie the dog, who was as active as ever. Oliver laughed, so pure that it reverberated around the yard as he wiggled his tail joyously. So happy that it made Grace's eyes water, she murmured, turning to face Tom, who was drinking his coffee at the table. It seems as though they were destined to be together. Tom grinned and followed her gaze. Charlie has been. Oliver has always been his defender. He is more than just a pet. He is family. Later that afternoon, Grace made the decision to write Carla. Oliver wrote a letter to her birth mother because she hadn't heard from her since getting Oliver, but she felt obliged to. In her letter, she detailed Oliver's development, contagious laughter, and the progress they had made together. Bond he had developed with Charlie. She conveyed her appreciation for Carla's faith in them and gave her assurance. Grace felt a feeling of finality as she sealed the envelope, knowing that Oliver was loved and cherished beyond measure. Although Carla may continue to play a distant role in Oliver's life, her choices opened the door for the family they. Tom pulled out a picture album he had been working on one evening when the family was gathering in the living room. When he opened it to the first page, I saw pictures, which made me think it was time we started recording our experience. His first steps, his birthday party, and Oliver's milestones. Times with Charlie. Grace chuckled as she turned the pages, highlighting amusing facial expressions and endearing photos. As they reached the last page, Tom surprised them by revealing that there was still one more. Furthermore, he handed Grace a small framed certificate that belonged to Charlie. Tom smiled and continued, "He's earned the official service dog accreditation." "He's not." Oliver's greatest friend and guardian, Grace, gave him a firm hug, and he was delighted by the gesture. With their lives getting back to normal, Grace and Tom concentrated on their family's future and found the best guardian anyone could wish for. They started planning to update the backyard so Oliver and Charlie could play in an enjoyable and safe environment, talking about ways to serve their community, motivated by the encouragement they received during their first journey. There are a lot of Charlies out there, so the notion of starting a local program to match families with rescue animals stuck out. Grace stated that it would be worthwhile for Tom if we could assist even one family in finding their ideal companion while they were looking for a home. Nodded in agreement, and as the months go by, we can tell our tale to demonstrate the love and devotion a rescue animal can offer. As time went on, the Miller family prospered, and Oliver became stronger and more self-sufficient, his laughter filling every. Charlie stayed at his side, constantly on guard and dedicated. One summer evening when the sun set, their link only became stronger, demonstrating the strength of unconditional love. The family gathered on a picnic blanket over their backyard and watched the sky change color. Oliver, who was pink and orange, went close to Charlie, placing his little palm on the puppy's fur. "I love you, Charlie," he said, gently. His words conveyed Grace and Tom's childlike innocence and honesty. Smiled at each other, their hearts full of having overcome obstacles and doubts. However, their love for one another and dedication to their family had brought them together to emerge stronger. "You know, someone told me a year ago that Grace murmured to Tom as the image faded into the twilight. Tom laughed. "I wouldn't have believed that a little boy and a tiny puppy would change our lives forever." Grace nodded, looking at Oliver and Charlie, "But I wouldn't have it any other way. It's a funny way to surprise us, don't you think?" In addition, this touching tale serves as a reminder of the amazing influence that animals may have on our lives. Have you ever had a relationship as unique as Oliver and Charlie's? Please share your experiences in the comment section below. We'd love to hear them. And if this tale resonated with you, please like this video, follow us on YouTube, and come back for more. Together, let's celebrate the strength of love, devotion, and unforgettable stories. Thank you for seeing, family. We hope to see you in the next video.